Super Tuesday, what's going on, guys? Oh my goodness. Raffia in the studio. It's 90 million degrees in here. I will be sweating profusely by the time we're done, and that's the way it needs to be when we get to Raffia. 'Tis the season for junipers, 'tis the season for Raffia, and although you guys have seen me apply Raffia a lot, there's all of those little nuances, techniques, and pieces of knowledge that we've never actually illustrated. If you're a Mirai student, you definitely have seen this. You've definitely been forced to do this. Never hurts to see it again, and forever, Raffia will be locked in the archive for you guys to refer back to fully understand its use, function, application, joining, and finality to be able to give you the best possible capacity to utilize it. Got Kendall on the mic tonight.
What's up?
Hunter producing the stream. Got our main man, a new guy on the team, Jesus on the detail cam. Give him a little bit of grace and some slack this evening.
Nice.
And we've got Twinkle Toes up in the sound booth doing his thing. So here's the deal, right? Raffia and this idea of what do we apply? Can we use electrical tape? Can we use horse wrap? Can we use all of these other things that stick to themselves and they're so much easier? And Raffia, gosh, if we're just being honest, and I asked you 8 times, why are you trying to find something else? By the 8th time, you'd say, oh, I like the way this looks better. Oh, this is, it's smoother when it's finished. Oh, it's easier to use. Actually, the 8th question would be, or the 8th answer to the question, why don't you use Raffia, would be, I have no freaking clue how to use Raffia. I'm just gonna be honest, I have no clue how to use Raffia. And what I would tell you through this entire operation is bear in mind that the trunk has to breathe, just like the foliar mask does. And when we start to cover the trunk in all of this artificial texture, or all of these artificial tapes and wraps, rubbers, etc., we start to cut off that transfer of oxygen, carbon dioxide, movement of moisture, all the things that the tree naturally does. Will it kill the branch? Will it kill the tree? Probably not. Are there benefits to being able to use Raffia appropriately in terms of a sustainable material to be getting the compression that we need? Absolutely. Absolutely. It's the highest quality, most effective, most beautiful if properly applied. And here's the thing. Raffia degrades in the sun very, very quickly. As the tree swells and the Raffia degrades, it pops open and it will not girdle all of the branches and things that we're utilizing or that we're having problems with when we start to use those more artificial materials. Raffia is a very clutch milestone piece of the bonsai practice, and we're gonna show you all of the ins and outs tonight as to how to use it, okay? So before we start into the technique of Raffia, let's just establish a few things. When I ask most people, why do you use Raffia? The number one answer I get is to protect the bark. This is absolutely incorrect. Absolutely incorrect and the wrong idea for why we would use Raffia. If you want to protect the bark, use paper towels. Coat that wire in paper towels, and we showed you that on the Stuartia styling stream. How to coat your wire in paper towel properly. That's going to be your best possible padding and protection of bark if that's your interest and that's your concern. Raffia's job is to apply compression as we bend so that we distribute the force of that bend over the widest possible area of tissue, and we remove the focal point of the bend to the weakest possible area. Naturally, when we exert a force on a branch, that force is going to focus on the weakest possible area because that has the least structural rigidity and is going to bend the easiest. When we apply Raffia, we compress that tissue so it's not as likely to break, right? So it's not as likely to form that acute angle. And beyond that, by adding that compression and consistently distributing that compression, we start to transition and transfer the force of that bend over a wider amount of tissue. This is why Raffia is so, so, so important, okay? All right, so to get started, I just want to walk you guys, and if you watched Shinpaku Styling 1 where we set the structure, you saw a lot of Raffia work. Tonight's going to be different because we're going to show you the full breadth of Raffia. Not only the application to the actual branch itself, we're going to show you linear Raffia, we're going to show you wire spines in Raffia, and we're going to show you the power of Raffia in terms of doing a very, very risky, severe bend tonight. So stick with us. But first and foremost, I want to show you how we apply Raffia without all the branches and all the garbage so that you can see the transitions, and I can show you the multiple ways that we can end Raffia at the branch. Now, first and foremost, we need to talk about our hank of Raffia. If you guys don't have your hanks of Raffia from Mirai, please, they're below this stream. Pick up your hank of raffia. It's the best possible price, and it's the highest quality raffia that you can find.
We sold out pretty quick last time.
Yeah, we sold out. We got a whole nother shipment. That shipment is already half gone. We'll be ordering another one, so if it's sold out, don't worry. We'll get you hit back up quick. Okay? We want to maintain this hank and this tie at the top in the best possible shape, so we always want to protect that. We're going to be grabbing a bundle of raffia, and the number of strands of raffia that we're going to be grabbing is going to be proportional to the size of the branch that we're going to be bending. Generally, when we start talking about bending a branch, and we'll go into what branches need raffia, how we know, and how we use that, generally 6 to 8 strands of raffia is the most minimal amount we'll use for the smallest branch we would ever apply raffia to. We're going to be showing you on the wood dowel tonight. I've got maybe 10 strands in this bundle here. This feels about right. I'm going to pull all of these different strands of raffia up to the same level so that when I tie this off, all of them are going to be secured in the tie-off, okay? We want to make sure that we don't have a lot of loose sort of flittering around pieces of raffia because it'll make it very difficult once we start the application. Okay, I'm going to take all of these and I'm just going to twist these and knot these at the end so that I put them all in a nice, simple, clean knot, okay? Tie that off. Don't burn a bunch of raffia. Notice that I have a very limited amount of garbage there, okay? When we get that finished, I'm just going to hold this in my hand. Go ahead and come in close here. Hold this in my hand. I'm going to wrap it up around my hand, leave myself a nice tail of raffia. I'm going to take this and I'm going to pass this through the center once, and I'm going to pass this through the center again twice, okay? Twice because this, when we put it in the water, is going to expand. Water causes raffia to develop an elasticity when it soaks so that it actually stretches. That's the compressive component of raffia, and that's the most beautiful aspect of it that we're seeking and striving to achieve. Now, once we start applying raffia, we only have that elasticity as long as it's wet. So when you apply raffia, you bend the branch while it's wet, because once it dries, it loosens and that compression is gone. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to toss this into my bucket of water. I've got a bunch of pieces of raffia sort of prepared. This is going to be going on the tree that we're going to utilize. I've got other pieces that are already soaking, but I wanted to show you this process because now that we've looped it twice, if we loop it once, it'll expand and turn into a rat's nest. And once it's wet, it sticks to itself, okay? So I've looped it twice. I'm going to drop it in the bucket and I'm going to let it soak, okay? Now I'm going to pull out these pieces that have been soaking for maybe 2 to 3 minutes. There's this kind of constant misnomer that circles around bonsai. When we're dealing with raffia, you need to soak it overnight. You need to soak it for several hours. Soak it in this temperature of water. Add ice, add hot. Look, put your raffia in a bucket of water, tied up and prepared properly. Let it sit for 2, 3, 4 minutes until you start to see clarity in the raffia. It's very solid. When we look at raffia as a tissue, this is a very solid yellow color. When we drop this into the water and it's properly soaked so that we've gained elasticity, this center section right here, that center section is going to turn clear. And that's your indication that raffia is properly soaked and properly gained elasticity, okay? So let me go ahead and pull out a few of the pieces that I'm going to be applying. And then we're going to go through the transition process on this dowel that's set up here. I can show you the start, I can show you the connections, and I can show you the finish. Okay, so when I pull this out, notice that it's been looped. I unloop once, I unloop twice, and my raffia is in perfect condition. I'll wring out the excess moisture, and there you go. Now, when we come back to that discussion of that clarity, right, and we start to come back to the idea, let me find one of these sections. We came back to that solid yellow. Now look at what's happened.
Why don't we get it real close, yeah.
That solid yellow's become clear. Do you see that? That clarity is what's telling me that my raffia has gained elasticity and is thoroughly saturated with water. Anytime we start the raffia application process, we want to make sure that we have all of our raffia laid out here. We don't want to, in the middle of raffia application, be trying to dig into the water with one hand while we're holding this with the other and trying to untie this so that we can get it and still apply and not lose the tint. Don't do that to yourself. Proper application of raffia is all about preparation. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to get my 3 strands set out here. I'm going to point the knots towards me because that's the portion that I'm going to be grabbing. Okay, and notice how easy it is for me to just untie these with that double loop. If any of you have ever used raffia before and you've gotten it all knotted up, you'll know that, oh man, that's easy. Gosh, I'm going to start doing it that way. And it literally makes all of your jobs, whenever we start to talk about the application of these significant techniques that are time sensitive and technique sensitive, the more you prepare and the better your preparation is, the better the final product and the better the function of that final product is going to be. Okay, here are my 3 strands of raffia. All right, I'm going to grab my scissors. Let's dig in, okay? Now I've got this dowel attached to a clamp because this is the easiest way to see the overlap, to see the application, to see the angle, etc. The thing that we need to understand about raffia is when we apply raffia, and if I were going to take this dowel, which I'm not, this is not possible. If I were going to bend this, and I were going to bend this down, naturally when that top portion of that branch starts to elongate under tension, it's going to want to pull that raffia that's providing compression. If we don't start raffia at a point where it's securely anchored, then we're going to lose all of that compression and the function of raffia is lost, okay? So I'm going to treat this clamp as if this clamp were a branch or a trunk or a piece of dead wood that is a nice firm anchor to be able to anchor my raffia to, okay? And I'm going to carry the knot out onto the dowel. You see this? Not a super obnoxious length, but also not short, because when we start to apply raffia, we never want to show our beginning, we never want to show our end, and we never want to show the junctions that we apply raffia at, okay? So if we can hide this knot, then that's our very biggest desire, to make this clean and to make this functional, all right? Now when I'm applying raffia, one of the things that you're going to notice is I'm always going to treat this like it's a belt. I'm always going to keep the raffia as a belt. I'm never going to bundle it up as a cord. Okay? So I'm keeping this flat and I'm keeping it evenly distributed in terms of the strands being equally spread across the width. And that's where that number of strands starts to impact how big of a branch we can apply raffia to. The more strands, the bigger the width, the faster we move down a bigger branch. That's where we're really adjusting that number of strands. Okay? Now every time I wrap this, you're going to watch my left hand here apply tension, just so that when I pull, I'm going to get that compression. And that compression of the pull is actually where raffia gains its function. Now, after I've applied that compression, I'm not going to be struggling and trying to keep all the tension on this. And this is where this stand is a beautiful illustration of it, because if I'm keeping too much tension on it, you guys are going to watch this get real sloppy and watch it rock around. That means that my technique is flawed, okay? Because that compression is stuck in this as long as I don't let this go, okay? So if I let it go, I've got to come back. Again, I've got to hold, and I've got to stretch that raffia. Now I've got that tension in it, and it's sticking to itself, okay? Once I get that first wrap on, whether we're dealing with a tree or we're practicing on a dowel, I'm going to come back in and I'm going to cut that knot off. I'd never want to see that knot. Don't leave it sticking out. This is one of my biggest pet peeves when you see people apply raffia and there's a knot and they cut it later and it looks crappy. There's no reason. There's absolutely no reason to do that. Cut it off, get it out of the way. Once you've secured one wrap, you're good to go, okay? Maintaining that belt. Now, Jesus, come on in close here just so you can show the overlap here, because when we start to apply raffia, we need to be moving it at an angle that gets the raffia down the dowel, okay? So I'm looking at roughly a 30% overlap of every single wrap, keeping it in that belt formation. I hold, I make sure that I'm supporting that branch or I'm supporting that dowel. I pull, you can see the water squeeze out of it as I pull, that's the elasticity. And now I can relax as long as I don't release tension. I don't have to struggle with this. I can keep it as a belt, I can get it back to that 30% overlap. Notice that 30% overlap again, okay? And this is what's going to give me consistent quantity of raffia on every single portion of this branch and distribute the force of that bend. So again, I'm going to get that 30% overlap. I'm going to support, I'm going to pull. That's what gives me that compression. Notice how clean and how beautiful that is. This is where raffia application should be an aesthetic product as well as a functional product. If we're not getting even distribution, if we're getting gaps in our raffia, if we're not getting compression, all of those things start to cause raffia to not be functional and also look really, really poor, okay? So this application, this technique, and the way that we handle this, notice my thumb and my index finger, making sure that that stays as a belt, coming back, supporting, applying that compression, 30% overlap, laying that down, getting everything just right and compressing, okay? This is how we apply raffia properly. Now, we get to this point where we start to near the end of our raffia and we're saying, this is the point where I just, oh man, how do we join raffia? You know what? I'll take electrical tape. I have to be really honest with you. Mr. Kimura never taught me how to join raffia. That did not mean that Mr. Kimura did not come to me when he's working on very serious trees and say, go get raffia, tie it up, soak it, and raffia this branch before I bend it. Yet he never taught me how to do raffia, but he told me to raffia a probably $500,000 tree, main branch on the tree. I had to do the root, the main root, the only living root on a juniper that won the Kokufu prize in the repotting to get that tree into the Kokufu show pot. He left the greenhouse for an hour while I applied the raffia and the wire spines to it, and he came back and just bent it. He never taught me how to do it, but he knew I could do it because he drove by my apartment every single night, and I took raffia home and I taught myself how to do this. And I'm going to teach you guys the fruits of 6 years of painful raffia application in a shoebox in Japan, right here, right now. This is going to be intense. Okay, you ready? All right, we've got these knotted up pieces. Now follow me closely, okay, because this is going to be counterintuitive to what you think. The knot is actually going to be facing me, okay? The knot is going to be facing me. The raffia is facing away. Okay, now there's multiple ways to do this. If I'm going to do this sort of the most illustrative way, did you like how I said that? Illustrative. I'm going to divide this in half, but notice that one side of it is actually not half. It's a little bit sparser, and it's the side that's nearest to me, because we're always going to be applying raffia towards ourselves, much like secondary, tertiary wiring. I'm going to wrap that to secure. Notice how I secure that knot that's facing towards me. Now I'm going to use my index. Are we in tight here? Okay, show this index and show this handwork, because all of bonsai is about dexterity. I'm going to use this hand, and I'm going to rotate. I'm going to use this hand to hold the tension that's on that strap of raffia right now so that I can free up my left hand. Go ahead and come back wide. Free up my left hand, and my left hand is going to pull this raffia bundle that's facing away from me. It's going to pull this raffia bundle forward towards me. Okay, notice how that's a nice clean fold right there. Now I'm going to come back and I'm going to grab this raffia that my other hand has been supporting, and I'm going to wrap this raffia right over the top of that fold. You see how I wrapped it right over the top of that fold? I've got a stranded piece of raffia here. Okay, right over the top of that fold so that I get 2 points that are securing that new bundle of raffia. Right, I've got the one that held the knot, I folded it forward, and I've got the rest of that strand of raffia or that strap of raffia covering that fold. Okay, I'm going to show you that again just so that you guys get to see that twice. Okay, now I'm nearing the end, not forward, okay? I can divide right here. What you're going to find when I move to the tree, though, is that I'm going to need to free up my hands. So I might go ahead and pin that raffia down so that I don't have to handle it. And once it's pinned down, I can divide, hold, unfold the back side, and now take this strap of raffia and bring it towards me, okay? Now that I've got that nice, beautiful fold, I don't want to pull. There's not enough tension to hold this. I'm going to grab that strap that I've been supporting the tension on, and I'm going to rejoin to that front section that pinned the knot down so that I've got my belt back together. Now it's being held in 2 locations, okay? One more time. Let's do that one more time. This is really the part that really sort of trips everybody up. Go ahead and come in close for the whole thing here, okay? Knot forward, right? I'm going to free up my hand, and I'm not wrapping around multiple times. I'm just freeing up my hand. I'm going to separate that. This is going to hold it. I'm going to unwrap the side farthest away from me. I'm going to take this whole strap. I'm going to fold it towards me. I'm going to re-grab that strap I've been supporting with my fingers, and I'm going to rejoin my initial belt. Now that initial belt is back together, this new piece of raffia is pinned, folded, and pinned again, okay? That is the junction and the joint that is so imperative and important for you guys to understand. Now, obviously, in that section where that junction or that joint, we've lost some compression because we can't necessarily be working on getting this compressed while we're joining that junction. Watch how I accommodate that, okay? This is one of those nuances. Instead of taking this and just starting my raffia again, I'm actually going to roll it so that I come backwards slightly. Did you guys see how I did that? So I just rolled it backwards slightly. So I'm going to come back here. Now my strap is there. I'm going to roll that backwards, and what that allows me to do, watch closely, in my left hand here, you guys see my left hand, I've got this raffia, I'm holding this. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to flirt my left hand forward so that I can carry this over the top of my old strands, okay? And now If I want to apply that compression, I support, I compress, and that junction is completely locked in, super clean, no visible sign except for a slight bump, which when you're doing this on a natural branch, you're going to have a lot of the contours in the natural branch. You'll never see this. You never lost compression. You've got a total solid junction, and everything looks uniformly clean. This is raffia joining and the use of raffia on the highest possible level of technique. To be able to execute this will give you the best possible chance of success, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to unwrap this again. I'm going to show you guys and just kind of function in real time, because doing it slow makes, I literally get confused myself, okay? Knot forward, cover, free my hand. Divide, undo. Forward, fold over, rejoin, okay? Now I'm going to flirt, roll back, come around, okay? When I come around, now we've got the lock off. Now I've transitioned, and now I go compression, and I'm on my way. Now, here's the thing. Once we've made that junction, I take this knot, boom, knot's gone. And this tail here, all of my remaining raffia, without cutting my new strands, comes off. All that garbage is gone, okay? So then I come back to the belt, 30% overlap, compression, 30% overlap, compression, 30% overlap, compression. Okay, and if we start to see these little pieces, are you in close here for me? Start to see these little pieces. I just take that and I just dive that right underneath my bigger, longer strands that I'm utilizing. And notice how I'm starting to get these stragglers too. If you start to get these stragglers, just sort of tease them out of the mix so that we can wrap over those and we don't leave a lot of garbage. Okay, I'm back to a point where I'm going to join again. Knot forward, wrap over. Now I've got far fewer strands. I've got this whole thing kind of coming undone. Don't panic. This is where we get to apply the technique. I'm going to free my hand. I don't have very many strands here, so I'm just going to leave 1 or 2 strands to hold that. Notice how I'm holding that? I'm going to unwrap and secure that. I'm going to fold forward. I'm going to take that, and I'm still with that small number of strands, I'm still going to cover that wrap and rejoin. Boom. I've already made that transition. Now, again, be really tight with your technique here. I'm going to roll back. I'm going to roll back. Boom. Okay, that gets me back into a position to be able to take over that, flirt that forward. Now I've transitioned. This is such a beautiful, this is the people always say, why did it take you 6 years? Well, several reasons. Bonsai is a very, very deep skill set and a deep subject. And in order to be able to process and really digest all of this stuff, it took 6 years of just day in, day out challenges, confrontations, and education from Mr. Kimura to get me to this point where these techniques became ingrained, but also where I started to evolve and develop my own technique. And this is where, even if you go back there today, probably, and this is not meant to sound arrogant, but it is meant to be observational of the current technique that's being applied. This is probably a more sound raffia technique than 90% of the professionals in Japan are using, and it's definitively more sound than the techniques that Mr. Kimura currently uses for raffia. Without a doubt, apologize if I sound like an asshole, but it is real. This is a beautiful, functional, absolutely stellar application technique for raffia, okay? Now, I've got a few different situations that I'm kind of encountering here. Say, for example, I'm sort of at the end of my run and I want to tie this off. Now, just the same as we need a solid anchor point here to tie this off, we also need a solid anchor point here. Sometimes we get that, sometimes we don't. I'm actually being caught in my own little web of telling you guys to be prepared to get all the, right, and now I don't have my bundle of raffia to actually get to the end, or I actually have a really good bundle of raffia that I don't want to burn. I'll burn it. Let me do that. Let me do that just to be able to do this correctly. And I told you guys to be prepared, and now I'm not. And this is a perfect case scenario for a teaching moment. And now it's going to come totally unraveled because I don't have 2 hands. It's awesome.
Need a hand?
No. I should look silly right
Well,
now.
I'll just like,
I should look.
we're just going to enjoy watching
I should
you
look silly right now. I really should. I should look like an asshole right now. Okay, all right. Let me join this one here. One more junction for you guys so I can show you how to properly tie off. Not forward, bam. Okay, small side down, undo, boom, boom. Forward, not a lot of pressure, right over the knot, bam, get that overlap, back together, back fold, zoom, flirt forward. Now I've got that transition taking place and I can go, get that compression. Now we're done. Okay, I'm gonna take the knot off, take the excess off, bang. This feels like an old school Batman. Bang, snap, crash. Okay, keep that as a belt. 30% overlap. Compression, boom. 30% overlap. Compression, boom. 30% overlap. Keep it as a belt, keep it as a belt. Boom. Boom. Okay, and now I'm getting to that point where I've got that transition piece. Notice where I'm at a point. This could be a branch, this could be a gin, this could be a crotch at a junction. Any of those are golden because now this is going to hold it. When we apply that downward force and it applies tension across this, it can no longer elongate because we're going to be caught here and we're going to be caught at the beginning. Watch closely how I do this. I'm going to run you through one iteration that is very solid. You'll never go wrong with this iteration, and then I'm going to show you a way to even improve on this fundamental iteration to get a better aesthetic quality, okay? We divide in half. Now watch closely. I'm going to actually circle around this and change the direction of my rotation, come back to this, and then I'm going to double square knot this. Boom, and one more square knot and I would be tied off, okay? That's it. I just showed you guys how to finish Raffia. Now, any Mirai students at home are going to be like, wait, what about the twist, double twist, around, twist, twist, twist? You have to be able to learn how to do that. If I'm just telling you guys in all honesty, if you're not running it out to a point like this where you can transition, your Raffia is going to lose function, you learned something new tonight. Save this one for you in the back pocket, okay? So again, I'm going to show you guys, as we come around, we divide in half. One has to change rotation, okay? Has to change rotation. Now, if for whatever reason this is not stable, there's nothing telling us that we can't continue around and square knot again here with a solid wrap, okay? But the whole fundamental concept of finishing Raffia, when we divide in half and we change rotation, now we can square knot, and when we cinch that down, that creates a really nice point of finality, okay? Now I'm going to show you the nuance to this. Okay, when I do that and I divide this big amount of Raffia in half, I'm going to have a very large knot as a result of it. So what I can do is I can come back to 2 or 3 or 4 really nice long strands. And what I'm going to do with these strands is I'm actually going to wrap off this greater abundance of Raffia to decrease the number of strands that are actually creating my knot. I'm going to come back, I've already wrapped over them. I'm going to cut those off cleanly, and I'm actually going to wrap over that cut site so that those disappear. Do you see how that happened? So now when I'm here, I've got 3, 4 strands of Raffia. I divide this in half, I bring this back around, and then I'm going to be forming my 2 square knots. Number 1, number 2, and I'm done. And notice when we started, I said we don't want to see where we start and we don't want to see where we end. Now notice how clean and how small that knot is. Notice how clean and evenly distributed. Slight hump where we joined here, slight hump where we joined here. Even angle, even application, even distribution, even tension across this. This is a very proficient Raffia job that would lead to a very high quality or high chance, high percentage chance of success in a bend, okay? Any questions about that?
What a beaut.
What a beaut.
Not about that specifically.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Okay.
But there are other questions.
Okay, good, right? So this is the beginning of Raffia application. You guys can come back and watch the very beginning of this. You don't have to filter through the whole Raffia stream. You don't have to find this middle mark or at the end. From the very beginning, you can see how to apply raffia. Watch this in your garden, watch this in your workshop, watch this in your garage. Whenever it comes time to apply raffia, and all of the techniques, all of the thought process in a very short window of time, you got it, you can apply it, you can refresh your memory when you need to. That's why I wanted to start out this way, okay? I'm gonna bring a tree up, right? And we're gonna actually look at this as it applies to a tree, because with a tree, we've got branches, we've got other considerations, and we need to really be dialed in as to how we apply this to a tree once it's off of this very easy to apply dowel, okay?
Let's see that tree.
Let's see that tree. Okay, so again, for those of you that have been asking on the forum, or excuse me, on the Q&As, hey, I have a tree that's a little wobbly, it got dislodged, it got bumped, it got dropped. Moving around in the pot, what the heck do I do? We filmed a feature piece of content on how we anchored this tree to the container today. We walked you through the steps and the options. This was the option that we chose because we're gonna be doing some fairly intense work on this tree tonight, and we wanted to proactively prevent any dislodging of it. Very common in junipers for me to secure a tree to a container even if there's no issue whatsoever, knowing that over the course of the kind of work I'm gonna be doing up here, I very easily, with this kind of length and lever arm and the leverage that I can apply doing heavy work up here, is gonna have a significant force down here. I proactively do this on almost every juniper that I work, okay? So just giving you guys a heads up, this isn't just a technique to be doing when you see the problem occur. Proactivity is gonna prevent that problem from occurring. Once the work is done, I'll cut this off and this tree will go back on the bench without all of this stuff. But if this tree were dislodged, you could do this to secure it until you could come back and properly adjust at the right season or the tree regains health, okay? All right, so this is a Utah juniper that I'm very familiar with. I did work on this tree in Sacramento, California, GSBF, I believe 2012, 2013, maybe 2013, possibly even 2014. This was my demo tree.
What is that, a Juniperus osteosperma?
Osteosperma, look at you, rock star. Yeah, Juniperus osteosperma. Now, when I did the demonstration on this, the tree was extremely wobbly in the pot, and that made me really, really, really concerned. Because when a tree is wobbling in the container, it means that the roots are also being compromised by that, and it's not that the roots break, right? That's kind of a misnomer. That's like a common bonsai myth. Oh, if the tree's wobbling, it breaks the roots. No. What actually happens when a tree's wobbling is that the roots never actually grow. And that's what you guys need to comprehend about this scope of work, is solidification and immobility in the container is paramount for the new roots to emerge and even grow, even start to grow after the repot process or over the course of the year. So if it's wobbling around and you've got instability, then your root growth is gonna be completely impaired, right? So this tree was moving around, we tied it to the container, it literally took the tree 3-4 years to recover from all of that sort of impact and damage. I don't know how long it had been wobbling around in the container. I don't know how soon it had been repotted prior to the demonstration, but it was a perfect storm of events. And almost every single piece of foliage on this tree died, except for this one big long sprig that you see sticking out, okay? Now this big long sprig was literally a pencil-sized piece of growth that was on the tree. Over the course of the past 4 years, careful watering, careful care, stability in the container, we didn't repot it, we just let it sit. It was able to regain its strength and regain the ability to produce roots, and we were able to properly repot it this spring for the first time. Now it sits very well anchored in the container. However, if you notice, the live vein is only on this left side right here. There's no living tissue on the right side of the tree. All of the physical weight of the tree is on the left side as well. So there's no living vein and no roots holding this tree from falling to the left. So when we're going about doing this operation where I'm going to be heavily bending this big piece tonight, there's no way that I'm going to risk dislodging this tree after we've worked 4 years to get it back to health. There's no reason that you guys should ever put a tree in that position. And so if you guys want to see how to properly do this and the nuances and thought process behind it, that video will be available to you Friday, okay?
What's it going to be called?
Good question. I don't know. What should it be called? What should it be called? What would you guys call that?
Something about security.
Say
Container security.
container security. That's right.
Regaining security. I've got some questions for you.
Yeah, rock on. I'll get the raffia ready while you do that,
Cool.
and then we can dive in.
So Davis had a question in regards to that technique that you just showed on the dowel. Why 30% overlap and not 20 or 50?
Why 30% overlap?
Yeah, why?
Because if you go 30% overlap and you've got 30% exposed and another 30% overlap, 70% exposed, 30% overlap, 70% exposed. If you actually break it down, if I told you 20, you would have probably 10 to 20 overlap, 40 exposed, 10 to 20 overlap, 40 exposed. What you'll find is you'll actually never get an area in there that has any fewer strands or overlap with that 30% overlap, so that you get 2 strong pieces of compression per layer of raffia. And that's really what we're looking for to get that even distribution. And what you see with raffia most of the time is either people chunk it on, so you've got these big masses of raffia and there's no compression and no value to it whatsoever. Raffia is not a material that the more you apply, the tighter it gets. It's the manner in which you apply it that it actually adds the compression. So you'll either see a ton of raffia in a very small location and it looks like hell, or you'll see as you start to bend the raffia open up and you'll see gaps in the raffia. That 30% overlap keeps a consistent distribution while preventing any of that opening or non-application area to exist. It's the best figure that I've found to be able to give students and have them have success by having that in their mind as they're actually applying the raffia.
Ben asked, if you prepare or soak the raffia and then don't end up using it, can you dry it and reuse it?
You can dry it and reuse it as long as you dry it soon and don't leave it in the water, because raffia as an organic material will decompose very, very quickly. It starts to rot within a few days, particularly when we're using raffia in the summertime where it's very hot. That raffia and that organic material in water breaks down very, very quickly. And so what you'll see is raffia left in water too long will start to become very brittle and it breaks. You'll apply tension and it'll start breaking, it'll fray, it'll fall apart. So as long as you're applying it or drying it the same day that you're putting it in the water, you're totally good to go and it doesn't detriment the quality of the raffia at all. Now, if you've applied the raffia, if you've stretched it, you've wet it, you've stretched it, and you've applied that raffia, and you decide, I'm gonna unwrap it, and you try to reuse that, that is no longer functional. Because that elasticity, you have one shot at that. You don't get that back. It's almost like, be like stretching a slinky. The slinky, once you stretch a slinky, it doesn't slinky so much anymore, right? Raffia is the same. You have one shot at maximizing that compression. So if you apply it, something went wrong, cut that off and get a new bundle. It's not expensive enough of a material to run the risk of not having that compression when you do a big bend. It's worth reapplying it to just be smart about what you're doing, because it does lose its elasticity in terms of its flex.
Thomas wants to know how you remove raffia after the trunk is set. Do you cut it or unwrap it?
So it depends, because a lot of times tonight what you're going to see is interior spines placed. So that means that there'll be nothing over the top of the raffia, and what we'll do is we'll sever it at the end, or it'll start to fray on its own from decomposition and the swelling of the living tissue, and we'll just unwrap it. It's very, very easy. If we wire over the top of raffia, that becomes a little more complex, because the branch swells. The wire is this compressive static coil that exists around it, and you got raffia trapped underneath it. A lot of times we can clean it to the best of our ability, but we'll always have raffia under the points of contact between the wire and the branch. And when we come back and unwire it later, we can fully remove it and clean it. Yeah.
And how long can you keep dry raffia? Does it have a shelf life?
Doesn't have a shelf life as long as it's kept in the dark and it's kept dry, right? If it's out in the sun or if it's wetted, then it will start to deteriorate. Dry and in the dark, it'll last as long as you want it to last.
And then a few folks in the chat say that removing raffia seems to be an issue. There's lots of bits left over sticking to the bark. What do you do about that?
So You'll notice that I'm going to teach you guys how to apply raffia to a juniper tonight. And there are times where raffia will adhere and we'll have to wait till the bark builds up on the tree and actually pushes off that outer layer before we can clean the bark and get rid of the raffia. I would say that that's rare. If we're applying it to pines, you're always going to have an issue with raffia on pines. And if you guys have watched all of the streams that we've done at Bonsai Mirai, you've maybe seen me apply raffia one time to a pine. It was on the spooky limber pine with the gin that I applied dry raffia because limbers don't respond well to wet raffia for reasons that you can watch that video to understand. But generally the bark of junipers,
styling.
Spooky styling.
Right?
Yeah, well, no, that was the Halloween tamarisk.
It was called 5 Needle Pine Nuances.
There you go, 5 Needle Pine Nuances.
Yeah.
Generally on junipers, if you wait for that outer bark to slough, you'll be able to get it off, okay? All right, let's dive into this. So, as it stands now, where you guys are looking, and I'm gonna join you here just to take a look at this tree and get you oriented. Okay, we've got sort of this base, we've got this flare, a little bit of inverse taper. It's an interesting piece of material. I wanna see this living vein here. I've looked at sort of all sides of the tree. It gets really plain over here. We still have the same inverse taper. We see it from here. We lose a lot of the age on the deadwood. Over here, it gets very linear. We see that real linear front. So when I look at this, I still, to this day, feel like our front is probably somewhere over in here, where we get a little bit of that live vein, but we get the most age in the trunk. Now, there's multiple ways that we can go about sort of addressing that situation. We won't focus on that tonight. We can talk about that later in terms of how could we make that maximized work, etc. But if I'm looking from here and I'm looking to maximize all of this character, and I've got this big piece up here, ideally what I would like to see is I would like to see this foliage mass down in here. Right? Because I have all of my features here, I've got all of my character in here. The farther away from that we get, the more unstable this base looks, and the less important these features are. So, what I would like to do is I would like to take this piece and bend it all the way down into here from this location, okay? Not a massively difficult task, but also this is not at all simple in any way. Okay, so first and foremost, I've got this gin. Go ahead and come in tight here. Okay, we see our live vein coming here. I've got a few sort of stopgap pieces if things go wrong. I regrew this from a piece this size, okay? I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna address these smaller pieces later, but I've got this gin that's getting in the way of that really nice smooth bend, so I'm just gonna go ahead and take this and sort of break this down just so that it's out of the way. We're working on a stream right now showing you guys deadwood nuances. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. Okay, I just want it out of the way. I can come back and work that later. Now, if I just try to bend this as it exists now, it's flexible, but it's only flexible to a point. So I'm actually going to remove the tissue from the inside of the bend, and I'm going to decrease 50% of the forces acting on the bend. So when we start to talk about bending, and you've got this branch here, I've got tension on the top, I've got compression on the bottom. As I bend this down, okay, as I bend this down, compression starts to compound. And compression starts to get tighter and it starts to push the force out to that weakest area that's taking the majority of the tension. If we take compression out of that system, now all of a sudden we have this. We have a very, very flexible strap of tissue. And junipers, if we have the option, would rather and bend better when they're under tension, so we leave the living tissue on the outside, than they do if we were to leave the living tissue on the inside. They don't prefer to compress as much because we can get a rippling of that cambial layer separated from the xylem, and we can see death as a result of that compressive bend. Sometimes that's the only option, because if this is deadwood here, we have to take the deadwood away, then we would compress, and raffia with that compression keeps that live vein from rippling as well. This is another big important part of that compressive force, okay? So I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna decrease the amount of tissue on this side of this branch, and I'm gonna remove that compressive force. Okay, and the tool of choice to do this for me is always gonna be a root cutter. Okay, most people would say, well, why wouldn't you use a trunk splitter? Trunk splitters are a little bit weak in terms of the thinness of their blade and the ability to pry and really dictate that cut. I always go with a trunk splitter so that I always go with a root cutter so that I've got more beef and more ability, and you'll see why here in just a minute, okay? So I'm going to clean off the interior. I'm going to be carrying that removal of tissue all the way up this side. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to give myself a little bit of space here in order to be able to get that split and control that split and not come across branches that are going to be tearing off of the tree as I'm performing that split. And I need to carry this split up high enough to where I get to a point that I have enough flexibility. I don't have any more issue, okay? So I'm going to carry it up fairly high on the tree in terms of my reduction of the branches and cleaning up of things. Okay, I'm going to take out some of these weaker branches where I've got a plentiful amount of branches and just basically make a runway for the split to occur, okay? Now watch closely as I bite into this, and Jesus, I want you in tight here where I'm going to be working on this tissue. Okay, I want to be grabbing a portion of tissue that still allows and leaves behind enough structural tissue for this to hold together, because you can overly thin. I'm going to go with about a 30%. Yep. I'm going to go with about a 30%. Let me pull this to the side. A 30% cut, and I'm going to roll this around so that you guys can see this now. You see the tool kind of lodged into that. Notice how much tissue I've taken and notice how much tissue I've left behind, okay? Now the other impact of inserting my tool in this way is I've got to have those flat blades existing so that my plane of bending, those flat blades are perpendicular to my plane of bending. I want to bend that way. Those blades have to be inserting into the tissue this way. Because when we start to thin this tissue, it starts to behave like a tape measure. So if we think about a tape measure, we've got this very flat tape measure, and if you take a tape measure, you can bend a tape measure like this all you want. Right? Any techno fans out there have seen this plenty of times. Okay? But once you start trying to bend a tape measure like this, that's when it starts to tear, break, split, become non-functional. Living tissue is exactly the same. So I can take this and I can bend here, and I can even rotate dimensionally here like so, okay? I can flex like this with my live vein as long as I've controlled that plane. Now what you see a lot of people do is you see a lot of people come back in with a power tool and carve out a channel like this. A channel is the worst possible thing that you can create for this type of work, because now you insert the opportunity for these thinner, weaker areas to start tearing, and once a tear enters the system, it will forever be the weakest point, and Raffia cannot mitigate that tear. So if we go with a nice flat plane, now all of a sudden we have this kind of movement with that nice flat cut site. We can rotate and we can really manipulate. We just can't bend this way. So it's important to strategize. I know I want this branch to come here, here, and here to be able to get it into the position that I want. This is what allowed me to select the area that I inserted my tool, the angle that I inserted those teeth in, and the amount of tissue that I'm taking out, okay? So watch closely. I'm going to try to keep my arm out of this as much as I can. I'm actually going to use those big beefy teeth. Look at how I'm leveraging. And Jesus, can you see right there? Yeah. Can you from right there? Yeah. Okay, so watch that split. Watch this split move as I leverage my tool. Watch this. See that split splitting? It's running right up that branch line, okay? I don't want to try and take my tool and guesstimate. I don't want to take my tool and guesstimate where that split's going to happen. I want to let the natural grains go ahead and dictate that reduction of tissue, okay? Now, once I start to see it tearing a bit too much, I can come back in and I can make that insertion in the same gaps so that I continue to control the thickness of that tissue, okay? I don't want this to get too thin. I don't want it to move into the living piece of the branch, okay? Can you still see that splitting? Yep. Okay? So this becomes really interesting when we start looking at this, because we start to get this very, very major separation of tissue. Okay, and this is why junipers, when you talk about junipers being this species that's so incredible for bonsai, This is why, because they have this kind of flexibility. And if you understand their vascular system, you can do wildly, wildly intense things with junipers. Okay, now I'm getting up to a point. I'm now up to a point, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to rotate this for the detail cam to see. I'm up to a point where I'm starting to be able to manipulate this without necessitating any further reduction, and it happened right past this big, thick branch. Now look at what's happening here. I've lost 50% of that force, okay? So that's why we're starting to talk about, oh, I just took away compression from the bend. But notice how unstable this is. Imagine if in your human body you pulled out the spine, or you shaved the spine by 50%. Your body would not be able to hold itself up very well. This is a very delicate, dangerous situation that exists now in this tree, okay? So we've got to be very, very careful when we're dealing with this at this point, because anything that we do wrong now equals disaster for this piece, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to finish this split down below. I don't want to tear this piece. I'm going to roll around so that the detail cam can give you guys a little bit more insight into how I handle this here. I'm going to get a little bit awkward myself, okay? So now I'm going to tear this down. Can you see this right here, Jesus? Okay, I'm going to continue to split that down with my hand, but I'm not going to carry that too far onto this living tissue because I don't want to damage this. I want to leave this intact. I could very easily strip this and kill all of these other branches. So I'm just going to bring my root cutters back in here, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to sever that with a nice clean diagonal cut. I've got a few little strands here that are still adhering. I was wondering why it was wobbling around so much when I was doing that. Right there. You. Okay. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pull this down. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create a nice clean diagonal cut right across it right there. Okay? All right, so let me roll this around so that we can see this in detail. You see that face right there? You see that, Jesus? Okay, so now you guys see the guts in the interior of that. You see where some of these strands exist that I can go ahead and pull out. Now I've just created a 50% force reduction, okay? This is big. This is a big component of being able to handle junipers, and this is where raffia now becomes a paramount technique to be able to utilize, okay? Now that I'm at this point, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to come back and I'm going to lay a wire spine into this. Now the wire spine, you guys should be saying, wait, you wanted to get rid of 50% of that force. Now you're going to put a piece of wire into that that's essentially replacing the compressive force, correct? Actually, I'm not replacing the compressive force. By taking a piece of wire spine and laying it into that strap that I've created, as this wire bends, it's very, very difficult for me to get that wire to ever form the kind of acute kink that an actual break would form if that live vein splits. So what this wire is doing is it's serving as a backbone to create a very nice, smooth bend that prevents that kinking or that breaking of the vascular tissue from ever occurring. This is actually the guidepost that this whole bend is going to run on. I've got to be very accurate in the way that I apply this. Okay? So as I'm looking here, I need to have a very firm anchor point for my wire, just like any other operation that we're performing. Okay, I'm using 4-gauge here. 4-gauge obviously is the most unpleasant to be using on your hands and for your spirit and soul, but we're going to go for it anyways.
Gotta go big.
Gotta go big. Sacrifice the soul for Bonsai. That's the name of the game. Okay, and I'm going to be coming all the way back here to this dead section so that I can actually secure to this, come across and into here, and I'm going to be coming right up into this right here. I'm going to be bending away from it so it'll tighten that wire. You guys will see. Let me go ahead and just anchor it. It'll be better to show than to tell. Okay, nice preformed hook. If you guys didn't see the preformed hook piece of feature content, you need to see that. That's a tool that you need in your toolbox, a very important tool to have. This preformed hook needs to anchor tightly here or this whole operation can be compromised.
Raffia asked if this branch will ever be stable on its own without the spine wire.
It'll be stable within 2 years. Within 2 years, because all of the foliage mass on this that was moving through 100% of the tissue is now moving through 50%. The remaining tissue is going to grow faster than it's ever grown because all those sugars and starches have to create new tissue. It'll become very, very rapidly stable. It's a great question though. Okay, so I've got that nice firm preformed hook. I got to get that wire moving at a pitch that's going to allow me to get over to this branch. I got to get around this gin that I've got here because this is going to be a valuable deadwood feature. Of course, in doing so, it screws up everything that I've done here, naturally. Trying to get this through all the deadwood and not damage these branches. Be very, very gentle. One of the most difficult things to learn is to be aware of all of the factors that are contributing and potentially in danger of being damaged when you start doing work like this. And now you guys are going to start to see why I tied this in. I do not have the ability to manage 5 things at once. I can at most manage 3 at once in significant bonsai work. I can handle the branches, I can make sure this doesn't break, and I can watch this wire. I have no clue what's happening to that base, and I can't. I don't have that much ability to focus. In our human minds, we can't do it. So if you're not pre-preparing this tree to be able to take this kind of work, what I'm doing this far out from the base is going to cause this to start flopping and wobbling, and it may not be the bend that kills it, it's your negligence of taking care of the stability of the tree that'll kill it. So this is why we showed that feature piece of content in conjunction with this tree. Okay, so now we're to this point where we've got the wire really nice and laid in here. Now I want you guys to pay very, very close attention to how I handle this wire. Hey Zeus, can you see it from here? Okay, so I want to make sure that contact is maintained through the totality of this, and I'm going to my hands are going to be in the way sometimes and they're not going to be in the way other times. Bear with me. I want to keep very nice smooth curves on this wire, okay? So notice how I'm kind of working that curvature of the wire, keeping this contact in mind, but working that curvature of the wire to be able to fit right into that, okay? And what you're gonna watch me do is you're gonna watch me drop this wire consistently, okay? I'm dropping the wire, I'm holding that position, and what I'm doing is I'm actually pre-bending the wire to the contour that's formed here. So watch closely. I can't get these pieces to be in contact with this. Can you dimensionally see that right here? Okay, so I'm gonna hold right here, I'm gonna hold that, I'm gonna bend. And notice how that lays perfectly into that spine. I'm going to hold here, I'm going to bend again. Notice how that lays perfectly there. I've got this bulge right here, I'm going to hold, and then I'm going to lay that. Now notice the contact that I'm achieving right here. It's laying perfectly in contact with that strap. This is the most under-addressed, under-taught portion of heavy bending, is how do you actually effectively get the wire to contour without beating the branch up in the process. You guys are literally watching a technique that took me 6 years to figure out how you execute these kind of things really successfully, okay? Now this has all the contour that I need to be able to start the process of securing this, so I'm going to come back to my raffia, and my raffia is going to consistently be the thing that I come back to tonight. I need to secure this piece so that this wire spine stays in contact, and again, I can only focus on 3 things at once. I'm going to have multiple things of raffia on this. I've really got to be able to focus on that raffia, so I'm going to take this wire spine out of my need to be able or out of my necessity to focus on. I'm going to actually tie it and secure it with raffia, okay? And I'm going to be following the same direction that I came onto it on, evenly spaced, to hold it against this branch, and I'm trying to get that wire spine right in the center of that bend. Now, if it were a wider branch, we would use 2 wire spines to span a wider portion of the tissue. This is not a big, massive branch that we're bending here. So 1 piece of 4 gauge right in the center of this, perfectly acceptable in order to be able to bend this safely and securely. Now, this is not, as a singular piece of raffia, it's not going to be sufficient to maintain super tight contact, but it will hold the system together so that when I come back with the actual raffia that's going to really give the compression, that the wire won't be sliding around and sloppy and moving inside of that system, okay? Notice how I'm watching all of the branches, being very careful with the branches. Okay, and now I'm up to a point where I can come back to holding and getting that nice degree of contact in there. Dialed in. Whoop, just as I said, being delicate, crank on that branch. Okay, now watch how I tie this off here. Now I'm at a point where I've got a nice, really nice hold, got a little bit of a bow right there. Let me see if I can get that out of this. There we go.
You know, the last Utah juniper we had was one of the very first streams we did, and I think we did a similar operation on it.
Did we do a central spine?
We did something like this where you split the branch, and I remember it was, one of the first streams I ever watched, and I was like, what is happening?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Okay, so that's running right up the middle, beautiful backbone here. Now what I'm doing is I'm basically looping my raffia around the wire right here to finish it, getting it nice and tight, and then I'm gonna come around this section, really holding that nice and tight, okay? Tight, tight, tight. The tighter this is, the better. And now that I've got that really nice and tied tight, I can come around, can loop around my wire here just to create a tie point. Notice how I saved that loop, send that raffia right through that loop, and go ahead and secure it. And that'll hold it just enough and with plenty of strength in order to be able to apply the next round of raffia. And you guys are gonna see a raffia technique that I've never actually seen anybody else use. I've only read about it and watched it, looked at it in books. And this is what I was really excited to get to show you guys tonight, okay? All right, so I'm gonna cut this piece off. Now it's out of the way. Get this stuff out of the way. Get this loose tail out of the way. Okay, so how are we doing for time?
A little bit over an hour.
Perfect, beautiful, okay? Now we said raffia's real function is in its ability to stretch and compress. And the way that we get it to stretch so that it can compress, apply compression, is soaking it in water. We've got to think though, when we talk about this bending of this strap, right? And we talk about the potential for this to pop like this. We've inserted a wire spine. Cool, wire spine is good. That's one level of security on top of this. But when we take raffia and we start wrapping raffia like this, the amount of compression that a lateral twist can actually add to stopping that is still pretty minimal, okay? So there's another idea when we start utilizing raffia, and that is, what happens when you start applying it linearly along the branch? So when that branch wants to pop out and kink, the raffia is actually applying compression back towards and pushing against that kinking from happening. This is where, and maybe you guys have seen this in the books, where we can run raffia up the back side of this bend, up this rear side, dry so that it doesn't stretch, and it applies this interior compression as that's being stretched to prevent it from popping out. This is the next step. Okay? So I'm gonna take, because this is not a massive branch, but this bend is gonna be very severe, I'm gonna take a modest amount. Now here's my focus whenever I start applying this kind of a technique. I really, really, really want to make sure that I have a nice coating of raffia across the entirety of the living tissue that exists, okay? So I'm gonna go ahead and cut these big long strands off here. I've got that knot right there, okay? And I'm gonna bring this back so you guys can see this, okay? I'm gonna start from the exact same starting point. Notice that I've got basically a width of raffia that covers the entirety of that live tissue when I fan it out in the belt form, okay? I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna bring this knot up, and I'm actually gonna tie this just with one single square knot so that that knot is facing up onto that living tissue, and I'm gonna twist that knot so that it's perfectly in line with the living pieces or the living tissue that exists, okay? So now this is running up, and let me make sure that rotation is correct. Okay, now this is running up the backside of this branch. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to stretch it up here, and I'm just going to hang it in the foliage mass. I don't need to worry about that yet. I'm going to come back here, and I'm going to grab some more pieces of raffia. Dry, still dry. I'm just going to knot these guys so that they stay together, and I got 2. Okay. And I'm going to take these 2 pieces of raffia and I'm going to utilize them in the same way that I utilize the raffia to tie the wire spine. Okay, now my focus in this whole thing is making sure that I have an even distribution of raffia across this living tissue. Now notice I have branches and I've got living tissue over here. That means that I've got to get some of these branches in between some of this raffia so that I've got raffia contact on all points of that living tissue. Okay, there's that. I've just got a real small edge here, so I'm not super worried about that. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to apply this and just start wrapping upwards and evenly distributing this so that this covers all of the living tissue that exists on the back side of this. And this really starts to ensure that I don't have that acute formation or that breakout of tissue from the process of the bending. Okay, and this we definitely haven't done before. On the other Utah, we didn't do this.
Yeah, well, it was something crazy with raffia.
No, I think you're right. We did split it. We did wire spine it. We did all of those things before we even knew what in the hell we were getting into. Created an absolutely epic, iconic tree.
I think it's called Utah juniper design. Is it just called juniper design?
I don't know.
It's very, very, very early in the archive.
It's one of the very first videos.
I'm pretty sure it's just called juniper design. There's 2 streams we did.
It was basically
Juniper structure and juniper design.
It was basically when we recognized that choosing a tree that massive to do the stream on meant it was going to be super, super hardcore. But man, ignorance is bliss in the beginning.
Right.
Okay, so I'm just weaving this up through here. Notice the really nice, clean application of this strap across the back of this. Okay, now I only need to take this up to the point where the split stopped. So I'm just working and working. Okay, Jesus, can you see that? You guys see how beautiful that is? How really nice and clean that raffia application is, and that's covering the living tissue on the back side. So I'm going to rotate around now. We see that we've got good coverage of our raffia. Some of it actually even slid over the front here. That's not a bad thing, but we lose its protection on the backside. So I'm just going to pull it back a little bit. Now watch how I handle this, because now we're going to get to this point where we're back to the tie-off from the wire. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to loop around that wire. And now watch how I handle this. Now I've looped around so that I've formed a single loop. We talked about raffia needing to have compression on both sides so that it isn't able to relieve that tension. Now I'm going to bring all of this raffia back down. This is my tie-off for this, okay? I'm going to bring it back down, and just the same as we wrap over that loop when we're applying raffia in the other styles and structures, I'm going to take these ties that I looped and I'm just going to wrap them back down to firmly secure. See that fold back right there? Now I've created a stopping point that is responsive to the wire. I'm going to divide these 2, change the angle of my rotation, and I can tie them off as a square knot right here in the front. Go find that in a book. Okay. Whew. Junipers, so much freaking work. Never have to do this crap on a pine, ever. Ever.
Why?
Huh?
Why?
Because we wedge cut a pine, and we're going to come back to wedge cutting. We're going to do a big trunk bending stream in the early part of September. No, I guess it would have to be after the national show. After the national show.
Late September.
Yeah, like mid to late, like somewhere in there. Okay, all right. Now we're set up, okay? Now we can come back to the wet raffia. So all of that to say, wire spine to create the guide, dry raffia along the back to give us that really beautiful coating so that we've got that tension that's going to be pressing into it. Notice the cleanliness of work. This should always be clean. Always, always, always be clean. It should always look beautiful. If it looks beautiful, it will function. If it looks crappy, it will function crappy, okay? So always getting that beautiful sort of concept to your work. Now, when we bend this, I want this branch. You guys are now looking at it from the right side. Let me rotate it around to orient you. There's your front, okay? I want to bend this down and in to close down this space that this protrudes. I'm going to bend this down and in. This gives me a, what kind of rotation? A clockwise rotation. Clockwise?
You're opposite
No,
to me.
counterclockwise. Counterclockwise
My
rotation.
spatial awareness is not.
Yeah, no, I'm shot up too.
Strong.
Okay? Counterclockwise rotation. Here's why that's important. The way that I apply the raffia to this now has to be in the counterclockwise direction.
David asked if it would be easier to start that dry raffia at the top and then sort of let gravity work for you when placing it on the branch.
No, because your tie point has to be down at the bottom. You can't tie up at the top. This is your most significant tie point. This is far weaker right here, and you're gonna want the most compression at the biggest point of the bend where your best tie point is. It'll always need to start at the bottom, and that is unfortunate because we do have to work against gravity unless you're doing this on a cascade, but you do need to start at the medius part when you begin this process. A nice soaked raffia. Love it, love it. Okay, get all those tangles out from the beginning. Don't let those tangles stay in. Don't assume that they're gonna work themselves out. Get all the tangles out in the beginning. Really get your raffia nice and worked out. Okay, get all the crap out of there. Make this as beautiful as possible from the very beginning. This will make your job of application far easier. Okay, preparation is the manner in which we accomplish the highest quality work. Okay, and notice how gentle I am with my raffia. I go to conventions and I see people taking raffia and just cranking on it, stuffing it in the, it's like easy now, right? Raffia is your friend, man. Beaut, what a beaut. Look at that.
What a beaut.
What a beaut. Am I gonna need 3? I should probably prepare for the worst, huh? What do you think, Troy? Think she's gonna bend?
I think she will.
Yeah, I think so too. Okay, in this raffia strand, I clearly prepared with a few less bundles, so I'm gonna use this as my third and final if I need it, okay? All right, so we said counterclockwise. Let's go ahead and let's apply everything that we learned from the dowel now that we're dealing with a tree with branches and all of the things that we've sort of been able to establish, okay? So I'm gonna start my knot so that I can apply and wrap over all of this setup. So notice how I've got all of this setup down here, all these knots, etc. I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna start this so that I can cover all of that up. Cover your work as much as you possibly can. Cover the nuts and bolts of your work to show the most beautiful possible product, okay? Now I've got this counterclockwise rotation that we said we wanted. I've got it here, okay? Starting off on the right track, I'll cut that knot to hide that. I don't want to see that junction where I started my raffia. Okay, get a nice little bit of compression just to be able to cover up the nuts and bolts there. Okay, be mindful of those branches and your raffia catching on dead wood. Don't abuse your raffia. Treat your raffia really well in this process because it's going to be the thing that gives you the capacity to bend with the kind of conviction that you're looking for, okay? So now when we're in here, we're no longer on a dowel. I've really got to focus on getting Nice, solid compression, okay? Once I get that compression, I can relax. This is the only way that you'll physically be able to apply raffia in a way that won't completely burn. I'm gonna go one more just to cover up that crotch. I got a few nuts and bolts showing there, okay? Okay? So the only way that you're gonna be able to physically do this is to be relaxing in between the compression movements. I'm going to keep it as a strap, sort of work through this initial area. Notice how I'm always pulling all of the tails through. I don't let raffia start to bundle up and accumulate in any area. I keep it nice and raked out. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to rotate to here so that you guys can see. So now I'm going to be applying this force and really cranking on that. You guys see how much force I'm applying to it, 30% overlap. Okay, I need to hold that tension in my raffia so that I don't lose it as I'm working through all of these areas. I've got to hold that tension. Notice where my thumb is. Notice my thumb securely holding that. We have to accommodate the tree. The tree is not accommodating us. We're asking it to do something that it doesn't necessarily think is probably awesome at this point. It has no idea how beautiful it's about ready to become. It'll be fully in agreement when we're finished, okay? I get that 30% overlap. I support. Really crank on that. Really get that compression. Now what we're doing is we're sucking this whole system together. We're sucking the wire spine together. We're sucking that raffia that's run up the backside together. This is the raffia that's compressing all of our different techniques that we've sort of emptied the clip on to be able to bend this effectively. This raffia is tying that system together and it's doing so beautifully. See if I can raise the level of that just a little bit. There we go. She gets a little bit cranky in there. Got past that point. Whew. Okay, so keep in mind that this first section, this really cumbersome area to be applying, this is actually the area that's going to be under the most amount of tension and elongation in this process. And also notice, I'm trying to be respectful of the base, but I'm exerting a whole lot of force up here. I'm trying to mitigate that force with my left hand. So I'm bracing here and I'm pulling here. Technically, if I'm pulling with the same force that I'm pushing with, that should zero out the force on the base of the tree. And this is where your offhand becomes such an important aspect. We talk about it in wiring all the time. Your offhand is important in every single operation we perform in bonsai. In repotting, it supports the soil. In wiring, it supports the contact of the wire and the branch, okay? Now we're coming to a point where we've got a branch that we've got to go around. Notice that I've split my raffia, but also notice that my last wrap is right up against the base of that, okay? My 30% overlap is that overlap of tissue and of raffia that I've just divided. So I create 30% here, 60% here. That accomplishes the overlap that gives us that consistent amount of compression. Wherever that branch occurs, your division is intelligently created to be able to give you the overlap that allows you to maintain the system. Really torquing. Okay, now notice, I'm going to carry this right up against the base of this branch too. 30% overlap. Got a little gap there. There we go. Okay, and now I can divide this 30% overlap. Weird how serendipitously that works when we follow those conventions. Okay, and notice how clean all of those areas around those branches are. If I have any concern, I can just flirt that. I can flirt that lower piece. Notice how I flirted that lower piece diagonally up. Notice how I've got this here. I can always come back and I can always overlap that junction again if I need to firm that up, okay? But I'm to a point where I need to transition. Let's see how this transition looks. okay? Not facing up towards the tip of the branch, okay? Front secures, divide, hold, raffia moves up. Rejoin your raffia right over that section right there. And you guys are probably all saying, oh, dude, that's different than what it looked like on the dowel. Oh, yeah. That's why on the dowel, you better be able to do it perfectly, okay? So now we're transitioned to a degree. Cut the knot. Get it out of the way. Now again, that back roll. This is where the back roll comes in. Back roll here. I'm going to flirt that raffia that's remaining on my other tails, flirting that slightly up. Notice how this is slightly up. I wrap over that now. Okay, and I execute that transition. So now I'm on to my second batch of raffia. I've made a very, very beautiful transition. Little bit loose right there, not bad, okay? Feels pretty decent. Now that I've made that, I come back in, take off those tails of raffia so that they're out of the way. Don't try to wrap those. Don't try to add those to this pile or you'll have all of these tails sticking out everywhere. And anybody who's done it, you're sitting there going, yep, yeah, I've done that before. I know exactly what he's talking about, okay? 30% overlap. We go back to it, okay? Okay, watch those branches. Juniper branch is very sensitive at the shoulder. If your raffia is catching on them, you're going full Rambo style, you'll be tearing branches off with the application of these techniques, okay? Really be gentle. Notice how I always lift it up over the branches, how I make sure they're not tied into that. I make sure it carries over the dead wood. When I get here, if I start to get them tangled up, I can start to untangle them. Nice compression, okay? Spine is perfectly dead center, 30% overlap. Notice how beautiful that looks. Come into the detail cam here and let's just admire here for a second. Okay, sometimes it pays to be vain about your bonsai practice, okay? When it looks sexy, call it out. That looks freaking sexy. I'm sorry, but that is beautiful raffia. And when we do good, we say we do good. That's good work right there. See you, Troy. Thanks, man.
Raffia asked if you'll still need to apply wire to make this bend happen.
No.
No?
Nope. Nope.
The spine was enough?
Not if you use the correct gauge. Now, here's what I will need to do. I will need to use guy wires to hold the severity of the bend because one wire is not going to be enough to give me the total severity that I want. But this is going to be plenty of torque to be able to hold. And if you guys have noticed through this process, the rigidity that this branch has gained, it's no longer flopping around anymore, right? It's no longer solidified. Because of that backbone, it's now its stance and its guide for the rest of this process. It was good I prepared that third piece of raffia. Go figure. I'm getting almost to the point where the branch is getting thin enough that this width of raffia, there's too many strands. Not quite, but we're close. It was always interesting to work with Mr. Kimura because he would always put so much significance on the structural setting. And he would always say structure is 90% of it, the rest a monkey can do. And if you guys have heard any demonstrations that I've ever given, I used to always cite that and say that felt so crappy as an apprentice. But now as we enter sort of almost 2 hours into this stream, or an hour and a half?
An hour and a half, yeah.
An hour and a half. Let me take a...
Yep.
Just stay lubricated. Now that we're almost an hour and a half into this stream, I'm just now getting to the point where we're even going to be able to entertain the bend. And all of a sudden you start to recognize, oh yeah, wow, bonsai, structure, lots of work. Lots and lots of physical work, lots of cerebral work. It starts to become a very intense endeavor to pursue structural setting on bonsai and particularly on junipers. They are a demanding species. Okay, we're entering an interesting situation here. Now notice how I'm getting into these branches here. Watch how I handle this. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do my standard division. But now watch how I treat this to be able to hit that middle gap. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to carry this piece up across the top here to be able to hit that middle gap. And I'm going to further split just a small section off of this main piece. Further split that. It's gotten a little bit tangled, okay, and we'll get it nice and neat. I'm going to further split that, and I'm going to drop that down so that I can rejoin in full force, and I get that coverage right there, okay? Now let me get this all straightened out because there's a lot going on here. Now when we apply that compression, and we come back over the top here with that overlap, starts to look super, super clean again, okay? Just a really, really nice compressive sort of crisscross right there. Notice how sharp that looks. Even though we've changed the angle of the raffia, we've gotten definitive support for those branches. Okay, I'm going to have to do the same thing here. The crappy thing about right here is we're getting into a point where I'm sort of running low on raffia right at a pivotal moment in all these big branches. This will always be the case. You will always run into the worst raffia problems at the worst possible time. It will never change. Okay, I'm going to flirt these up just to get that. See how I flirted that up diagonally? I divide that, I flirt that down, I flirt that up, and see how that covers that area right there? And then once we get past it, I don't have to keep it like that. I just need it for that wrap to be able to coat that area. So we've got that compression, I tie it tight. I've got a bunch of stragglers. I'm going to fold those up into the mix so that they're covered. See all these stragglers down here? Just going to fold those right up into the mix. Into the mix with Carl Cox. Okay, again, we're going around a big one. I'm going to flirt this up, flirt that down, get right around that shoulder. Give me that compression. Yeah, that is a solid raffia job right there. Okay, all right, so we're getting up near the top. In reality, I would like raffia up through this section. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to tie on this next guy right here, but I don't want this many strands because it's getting so much thinner. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to take this and I'm just going to cut a few of those strands off. I decrease that number so that I've got a much more delicate amount of raffia on my knot. Okay? Again, watch closely. I'm going to be doing this in your face. I'm going to overlap, divide, front stays, back comes undone. Okay, I've got to work out my hands, particularly to be able to show you guys. Raffia folds up, back now covers the fold. Back together, okay? Now we've covered the fold. Just get that nice and covered. Okay, now I'm going to pull this back. I'm going to reverse. Let me get this through these branches. I'm going to reverse that fold. Can you see under my armpit, Jesus? I'm going to reverse that fold right there. I'm going to flirt that raffia up. And I've transitioned. Boom. Now we're free. Okay, now we're on to long raffia again. I'm going to compression. Okay, now I'm going to get rid of the knot. I'm going to get rid of the tails. Be very aware of the branches. I'll cover all of my tracks. Okay, compression. This is really that point of finality for that spine. This is where the fold back is on my linear raffia. I got to be really concise, really nice and tight right up against the base. Okay, got to get a little bit of that overlap through these branches, so I'm going to divide. And I think I'll probably refrain from going much farther than I have to, just for the sake of time and wanting to bend. Okay. Whew. That was a shitload of work. Okay, now watch the tie off here. I'm actually going to treat this big long strand of raffia, or excuse me, big long strand of wire as my tie off. Now I want a nice small knot. I want this to disappear. I'm going to take 2 long strands and I'm going to tie off the rest of my raffia right here. Okay, so I'm going to wrap over. Now I can free those from my grip. I'm going to take my scissors, a little bit of dexterity to get them taut enough to cut. I'm going to wrap over those cut ends. Take 1/2 of this slender strand. Okay, I'm going to reverse my pitch right here. Boom. And I'm actually going to wrap around one more time, just so that I have a nice amount of contact and ability now to tie off here. All of my strands are covered. Boom. 1 square knot. Boom. 2nd square knot. Any way that you look at that raffia, take a look from here. Look at that. I couldn't see that section. I couldn't see any of that. Really, really beautiful. Few stragglers, nothing really major. Really good raffia application, okay? Because it looks beautiful, you guys are gonna watch this bend with ease, all right? Now, we know we want this folding in. I've got this big piece of wire. You guys should be saying, what are you gonna do with that? Well, this is obvious now. I'm not gonna wrap wire back over this, and let me turn this towards you guys. I'm not gonna wrap wire back over this raffiaed section. I don't need to. I have a wire spine in the middle that is bound to this. It's literally never gonna separate from it. I'm gonna take this now, and I'm gonna apply this to this upper section so that I've got the ability to manipulate this without adding wire to this. This is another really clean technique for you guys, okay? So I'm gonna hold. I don't want this to undo all of the tension that I've established here. I'm gonna hold and give that a really nice firm support as I start to transition into an angle from that linear movement. Okay, now this comes back to the structural wiring stream that we did, where we start to say, okay, here's where we put all of that into process. When we're structurally wiring, we wanna make sure that we're using the length of the wire, that we're functioning in straight planes, that we're getting that contact and supporting that contact between the wire and the branch with our supporting hand. These are all of those points, okay? So I'm gonna be using out here, making sure to protect my branches, functioning in those planes. Notice my offhand, supporting, really maintaining that contact. Same counterclockwise direction of rotation. This is gonna be consistent. We set that when we started this whole process. Raffia followed it, wire followed it, spine everything followed the counterclockwise. Okay, just getting rid of a few unnecessary branches. Now we've got 4 gauge going onto a branch that literally could deal with 8 gauge and bend. There's no place to transition now. You're committed, you're fully in. I've got to carry the 4 gauge all the way out to the tip. And this is where this wiring technique becomes so imperative to understand how to manipulate structural wire. Notice how I'm almost applying it in a real jerky, forceful way, but look at my offhand. Notice how I'm supporting here. Okay, if I get a space, I'm gonna take that branch to the wire. I can't take the wire to a branch this slender, so if I get a space, I'm actually gonna take the branch to the wire instead of trying to overly manipulate the wire. Let me show you that. Hey Zeus, is it possible to see that right there? You start to see the wood? You can see it? Okay. So now I've got this wire here. I can get it to there. I've got this space here. Watch, I'm going to take the branch to the wire and then bend. Now I just close that space. Take the branch to the wire and then close down that space. And now we've got this beautiful application. Same angle, same spacing, no gaps. Look at this system. Look at this system with Raffia. This is important. Not a single thing is visible here. All of those starting points are tight. They cannot relax. They cannot give slack. Consistency throughout, no spaces, even overlap, even tension, even compression. This is what allows us to have success, okay? All right, here we go. So we know that we're first and foremost, we're going to be bending. Now let me just get some of these sort of initial branches out of the way. We know that we're going to be bending all the way down, and we want to be bending from as close to the base as possible, okay? So I'm going to be using my offhand as a fulcrum. Anywhere that these fingers are, I'm bending against that, okay? Now I've got anywhere where I've got, and focus right here, Jesus. Anywhere where I've got a big major branch, I know this could be a susceptible crotch right here, so I never want to create a fulcrum right by a junction of a big heavy branch, okay? So I'm going to just move my finger out here. I'm going to use that finger as that next fulcrum. Okay? So when we start looking at this now, that branch was just straight up here. And that was not a heck of a lot of effort, and I also wasn't sitting there sweating bullets while I'm bending it. We've created the system to be able to manipulate this in this way with a lot of confidence. Now, we can't be careless. We've got to be aware of all of the situations, but that was a fairly effortless move to get that branch from up there down to here. Okay, I'm going to leave myself a little bit of a handle down here, because we said we want to be functioning in this clockwise direction. Now, we also said, in terms of our tape measure, we can roll here and we can roll here. This is perfectly acceptable. So I have the ability to take this and roll like this to get this back into a position back in here. This may be where I'm hitting the limit of my 4 gauge. Nope, still got it. Wow.
Whoa.
Whoa.
Big bend.
Big bend.
Beth asked if this technique can be used on other species or if it's juniper specific.
Very juniper centric. Very, very juniper centric this is. This is not a universal technique by any stretch of the imagination. This is learning to manipulate juniper tissue to the maximum degree, okay? Now, if we're looking at the front now, we've got to be thinking about the quality of this bend, because I just don't want to show this perfect sort of arc. So I want to try and start tightening that arc up and finding where can I start to rotate that and start to get that a little bit tighter, so that when I move that back and I bring that foliage forward again, we've got a really beautiful looking bend there. We have this, maybe we use it, maybe we don't. I don't care about that right now. I'm focused on this, okay? So I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna pull this in here with a nice guy wire to this back section. Come in tight here for me. Okay, I've got a beautiful gin here. I've got my leverage point right here. Connecting those two really locks that in, and that's going to allow me to do some more exploration with this in terms of where we want it to go. Let me go ahead and get that ready and tied in.
Dr. C asked if the spine will come out in 2 years or...
Oh, without a doubt. Yeah, when the raffia comes off, so does the spine. But you'll probably have to re-support with guy wires, because you're never going to wire this whole thing. This now becomes a continuation of the trunk, right? All of this other stuff, this also will all probably become deadwood to some degree or will not be as significant as this. The deadwood that runs out the top of this branch will carry on to that portion that we hollowed out or that we removed. The inside of that strap will be deadwood, and that'll carry through, which is a really beautiful part of all of this technique, is you create this cohesive sort of design concept. Now there are a lot of, as you guys watch in bonsai, there are a lot of other professionals that anybody can hollow a branch, wire, apply raffia and bend it. What becomes sort of a discerning moment when you guys are watching these techniques and you're trying to decipher, what's right, what's wrong, what's good, what's bad, you should always be looking at sort of the cleanliness. You should always be looking at the concise nature of the bend, who's focused on that bend, looking as good as it possibly can. Those are the pieces that are going to give you the very best insight into who really truly understands the technique, because bending something is not hard. It's very, very easy to bend something. But it's when you bend it with intention and you create beauty with that bend, that's really when it starts to become a high level of understanding and technique. There's a lot of junipers out there that have these big looping bends, and now the foliage is back here and it was out here and there's this big arc. Nobody wants to look at that, right? So we've got to look at how do we create some of that tightness, and then how do we respond now? Okay, so now that we're here, how do we respond to this? Well, let's come back. Let's change the dynamic. Make sure that I don't have anything I'm not seeing. Everything looks, oh yeah, it's bending really, really smoothly. I like that, I like that. And then let's bring this out a little bit, not to hide this trunk. Let's expose this trunk. Let's show this trunk off for what it is. Oh, I love it. I love it, I love it, I love it. And let's sort of work this back into this interior here so that it's not so far forward. I don't need you anymore.
Ken asked if any pests live in the raffia, or like to live in the raffia.
It's possible. It's possible that pests could like to live in the raffia. I mean, if you were a pest, it wouldn't be a bad place to hang. Yummy. Yummy, yum, yum.
Gary had a question, kind of.
Okay, hang on.
Oh.
Let me just sort of
make it happen.
Whoosh. Oh. There we go. There we go. So we could use this, but I think it's going to be best to sever it, don't you? And really compress down, have this beautiful foyer mass here.
Yeah.
Isn't that intense?
Really intense.
Yeah, yeah. I think so too. No more safety gaps. No more stop gap.
Looks so good.
Right? Isn't that crazy?
It's nuts, dude.
Yeah. So now the way that we form the branches are how we're going to work with it. Now here's one thing that you guys should key into immediately. Do you care, or have you even thought about the inverse taper at the base since all of that was compressed? Have you? Have you thought about it?
No.
Have you even looked at it?
No.
Right. So when we start to talk about inverse taper ultimately decreases visual stability. Well, when it was that long, that was all that you saw. Now that we compressed this, we brought the foliage mass back to it. Now all of a sudden, that doesn't matter as much. You see everything else, and when we style this whole thing out, you're gonna look at it and you're gonna say, inverse taper, no big deal. Looks pretty cool. These are all of those visual understandings that if I started telling you that when we began, it wouldn't have made a whole lot of sense. But now that you just see it, all of a sudden you grab onto that. This is a major design concept for you guys to hold, okay? I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna finish this outside of the stream. I'm not gonna try to finish it tonight, but getting to show you guys the appropriate ways to use raffia and the diversity, the raffia to be simply applying to add compression to a minimal bend. The raffia that we are able to run along the backside, dry, to be able to further reinforce and prevent that break. Raffia to secure the wire spine to that strap and the understanding of that dynamic, and the raffia that we applied through the branches, junctions, stopping points, to be able to give us the potential to bend like that. This is a major, major technique for you guys to be able to evolve your bonsai skills. And the only way you get better watching this video, practicing this, and trying it to get the feel of all of these dynamics, okay?
Awesome.
Can we do some questions?
Yeah, I have a couple left.
Yeah, let's do it.
So Gary, this is from earlier in the stream, I think when you were first removing some branches. Gary said, juniper branches are root specific, so won't removing 30 to 50% kill branches?
Removing 30 to 50% of branches kill roots, I think is probably what he was asking.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah. No, not necessarily, because even though branches are root specific, all of this tree is living off of one live vein, and all of the roots in this container are attached to that live vein. So just by removing foliar mass, we're decreasing the amount of resources that are feeding these roots. But if these roots are strong and healthy and we keep enough foliage mass on this tree, then it will still feed the same roots that existed with all of this foliage mass, or half of it. And this really comes down to now the dynamic of this is going to continue to transpire and lose water. Now that I've got maybe 30% less foliage mass, and I mean, if I just, let's just understand how much I've cut off, because it's not much, okay? That's all the branching that I cut off tonight, okay? A very minimal amount, realistically, maybe even 15%, okay? But I will see a reduction in water usage, because I'm 15% less transpiration, so there's gonna be less water. We just have to be very careful about our watering now to maintain balance of water and oxygen. Those roots should help this thrive. These should facilitate the health and growth of those roots. No worries, no issues.
Joe asked if the tie down wires, do they vary in size depending on how much force it needs to hold?
Yeah, they can. The bigger the tree, then the heavier the gauge we would use. And when you guys watch the video, again, Jesus is going to work on the edit for that. I'm assuming it'll be out Friday, so you'll be able to see it this week. You're going to understand the nuances, and you're going to understand the thought process, and it's going to make a lot of sense for you guys when you watch that video, because I do one initial tie down where I do everything the wrong way, but it's what I see people do 99 times out of 100, and every single step of it is wrong. And then I go back and I do it the correct way, and you'll be able to see the difference, both in the function, the look, all of the steps. And that's really what I wanted to give you guys, because people try to tie their trees to the container all the time. I've never seen anybody do it well enough to work. We have to tie trees to the container all the time to get away with this work. We're now done with this work, and this tree is completely immobile in the container. None of this, absolutely none of this moved, okay? That means that we did a good job.
Marcia asked if it's an issue that all the foliage is downward.
Definitely an issue, Marcia. So we can't set this outside now after this work. We actually have to go through and we have to finish what we started with this tree. Not a problem. We'll go through, we'll wire this out. When we do this kind of reorientation like this, we can't leave foliage upside down because it will sunburn. And that's the biggest issue. And also, they're all kind of clumped together, so they're not photosynthesizing very well. If we go through and we lay this all out and create that beautiful shape and that pad development and that photosynthetically efficient system, the tree won't even skip a beat having gone through this.
Dr. C asked if you could touch on some more of the basics of how you determine whether you really need raffia or not, and why a spine versus standard wiring.
Good question, Dr. C. And when I started this work tonight, my thought was that this piece right here is about slightly less than the diameter of my pinky. And this piece right here was a question mark for me. Do I need raffia on it or do I not? Anytime that we start to question, do I need raffia or do I not, I'm going to bend that really severely. It looks a little bit thicker. There's no harm in applying raffia. Okay, now the number of strands that you utilize on that thin of a piece will be far less than what I utilized on this big, thick piece. But there's no harm in applying raffia, and I absolutely encourage you, when you're first learning and starting to get the feel for what needs raffia, what doesn't, and how do I know, go ahead and apply raffia. Work on your skills. Give yourself that buffer so that you can bend with confidence. There's no harm in applying raffia, okay? I would have probably applied raffia to that pinky-sized branch to be able to bend it in the dramatic fashion that I was planning on bending it, but I wouldn't really apply raffia to anything much smaller than a pinky-sized branch. And that's my general rule of thumb. Sort of that diameter of your pinky generally starts to be when I look at it and say, we could have some potential issues here, all right? Now moving on to your second question. Why did I apply a wire spine instead of a wrapping copper wire around this? Now you have to understand what the role of the wire spine is, okay? So when I've got this wire spine, and I'm bending right here, okay? That spine is what allowed this to be so smooth. It's why this piece right here is an arc and why it didn't break, okay? So I'm actually using that spine as a guide. Now, if I wrap this around my arm like this and I start to bend, I don't have any guide for a branch that I've removed 50% of the tissue. I can focus, just in bending this, it'll focus all of the force on the weakest possible point. I don't have any backbone to really protect that bend from kinking and breaking. And that's where the spine is there when we remove that tissue to provide that smooth track to bend on and support it. So when we compress that spine to the branch, it creates that nice smooth curve and prevents that smooth curve from breaking, okay? In a bend like this, anytime we remove tissue, you should never be wrapping coiling wire around it. You should never be coiling wire around a branch that you've removed tissue from, okay? And anytime that you see that, you automatically know the technique is flawed. Because when you think about that, in order for wire to have function, it has to have complete contact, 360 degrees of every revolution on that branch for that wire to function. And when I say complete contact, I'm saying, let me just make sure that we understand. Okay, we need to have contact at all points as we wrap around this. But if you've removed 50% of that tissue, you have 50% of that branch that is still the cylindrical form, and then you've got a flat tape measure-like shape. So it's flat on the bottom, it's cylindrical on the top. If you're coiling wire, there is no possible way to have contact on the bottom of that branch. You've got a flat section, you've lost the cylinder, so you start to get these big spaces underneath that wire, and it completely becomes functionless. Absolutely functionless. Doesn't support the branch, doesn't protect the branch, doesn't guide the branch, doesn't hold the branch. Worthless technique, okay? So the spine, when we remove tissue, gives us a guide, allows us to hold that bend wire. The raffia gives us compression. The raffia run linearly dry, further reinforces that to protect really big bends and really dramatic movement. And these are sort of the incremental steps. Wire number 1, raffia and wire number 2. Raffia wire spine number 3, raffia on the front, or raffia on the living tissue, wire spine on the interior, and raffia over the top. That's your 4th option, and that's your most significant weapon for the biggest possible bends you're gonna make.
Okay, yeah, so Wayne, I think you answered Wayne's question, which is it ever necessary to wire over the raffia?
You know, only if, say for example, I've got this pinky-sized branch and I raffia this, then I can wire over the raffia and bend this. There's no spine that's gonna go in. I'm not gonna remove tissue. So this comes back to, when we put a spine in, it's to give a track to run on when we've removed tissue, okay, when we've taken away compression. But if I'm just gonna raffia this and just really crank on this and bend it, then just raffia and wiring over the raffia in your standard form, totally acceptable, absolutely practical and common technique that we practice.
Oh, Wayne clarified. Is it acceptable to use both a spine and wrapping over that?
Functionless. The wrapping is functionless. It's absolutely functionless. It's more for your own security and peace of mind than anything else. It gives you nothing. It gives you nothing.
Kurt asked if Utahs are brittle relative to other junipers, and Gary asked if this work tonight applies to all junipers.
This work tonight applies to every single juniper you could ever approach. Okay, this is a very fundamental juniper-specific application. Now, you can apply raffia to any species of bonsai. You should be asking yourself, is it functional? Are the bending techniques that this raffia has functioned in tonight applicable to my other species? Some of them, yes, maybe Taxus for sure. If you guys go back and watch the Taxus stream that we did, I hollowed it out, I put a wire spine in and I raffiaed it. I didn't use this linear raffia on the backside of it, but we did the same thing, right? This does apply to multiple different species. But juniper wide, this is a very, very fundamental application of technique.
Are Utahs brittle?
Utah's tree by tree specific. This Utah growing as healthy as it has, yeah, I mean it's brittle. It's brittle enough to want to split. And really, when you, Jesus, can you come in close on this? Hunter, can you zoom in here? Okay, you see that split right there? That's the phloem and the cambium completely having separated. That's actually a piece of deadwood now moving forward. So when we start to see that kind of stuff where that tissue readily separates, this is where we see compression on the inside here, starting to exert a force on the exterior and that tension. Now I'm gonna do something on the remainder of this. I'm gonna come back in with my root cutters and I'm gonna split this and we're gonna see if this tissue behaves the same way. And these are experiments that you guys can do on your own, in your own homes, in your own workshops, in your own backyards, okay? I'm gonna come back in here and I'm gonna remove compression, okay? Now compression is gone. Now let's see if that still splits. Let me get the bark out of the way. Let's see if it still splits. A little bit, not nearly as much and not a total severance of the tissue. So by removing that compression, we literally allowed the tension of the tree to release so that it didn't damage the tissue. That is interesting. Interesting little experiments you can do to see the validity of the knowledge, right? You should always test your theories. You should always test other professionals' knowledge. Test my knowledge. Go and try it. See how it works. I feel very confident in what I teach you guys because I've done it so much. I've seen it fail. I've tried it 5 different ways. I've seen the ones that work, the ones that don't. This was a pretty stellar little experiment tonight to get to do on the stream and show you guys the nuances of raffia.
All we got.
That's it? Dude, awesome. I've been looking at this tree thinking, man, I want to work on that tree. I haven't had an excuse to bring it into the workshop. Tonight was the night. It gave us all of the things that we needed. I love it. Now we get to dial this thing in, move it forward as a bonsai. It's going to be an absolutely stellar tree in the future. Thank you guys very much. It's always fun to get to do this with you live. I very much appreciate your support. The team, we're all working hard for you guys and we couldn't do it without you. Lots of love. Get your raffia game on. If you don't have a hank of raffia, get one before they're gone. We'll get more, but it'll just be a little later. And get to those junipers, man. It is the season. It's time. Get your bonsai butt in gear and let's make some quality trees. We'll see you guys next Tuesday.